John Ondrasik is a popular musician better known as Five For Fighting. When he saw the horrifying U.S. pullout in Afghanistan, he wrote a protest song that not only got him censored, but had refugees contacting him for help, since the U.S. government wouldn't. We talk about that, my time in Iraq, our friend Andrew Breitbart, and a whole lot more. Thanks for giving me the time. We've hung out on a couple of these calls before, and I always enjoy it. You're an interesting guy, and I want to learn some stuff of what you're doing.
Thanks, Ken.
First thing that I noticed when I did just a little bit of looking into your background is your first name is a little controversial these days.
Well, it used to be cool because it sounded like a violinist or a left-wing hockey player. But yeah, Vladimir these days brings a little baggage with it. But not all Vladimirs are homicidal maniacs, and I can promise you that. And my dad's a Vladimir, and my son's a Vladimir, and you know, if we're lucky enough to have a grandson, we'll have another one. So we'll try to put the name in a better light.
You're taking that seriously. Okay. All right. So nobody's kicked you out of the donut store or anything like that?
Not yet. I still go by John, though. Yeah.
So look, let's just jump in first to I want to talk about Ukraine a little bit and the president there, but let's get into the thing it's just been heavy on you. I want to know, how did you get into the whole Afghanistan kind of helping out there, because that's an interesting story.
Yeah, you know, Ken, I had no intention of writing a political song. I've really kind of tried to walk the tightrope of presenting some of my views in my music, but not standing on a soapbox and lecturing people. I get so annoyed when celebrities, you know, our moral betters lecture us on the culture and politics. So I've never kind of been in that lane. But of course, when Afghanistan withdrawals occurred, like all of us, you know, we were kind of just in shock watching the images come out of Kabul, and, you know, mothers handing their babies over walls and people falling from airplanes. It was kind of like a flashback to 9/11. Just couldn't believe what you were watching.
Right.
So of course I was angry about that. And as a songwriter, you kind of go to your piano and you just bang on the piano more as a cathartic exercise. I wasn't planning on writing a song, but the song really started to take shape. The day after our last soldier left, I got a phone call from a friend of mine, a woman who I'd known for a decade, who does incredible humanitarian work, just the salt of the earth. And she said, I need a contact. And I said, sure, no problem. What are you up to? And there was a pause on the line. And she said, well, I'm organizing flights to rescue our citizens from Afghanistan. And I just couldn't grasp that. I said, so hold on. I said, I pulled over. Actually, I was with my family driving to Mammoth. I pulled over by Crowley Lake. And I said, you know, so you're telling me you're risking your life to go down and rescue American citizens that we left behind? And she said, yes. And because if I don't do it, who else will? So that night I just started writing Blood on My Hands. Again, I wasn't sure I was going to put it out. I didn't know what it was, but it was just kind of as an artist, you want to do something. And so I did. And the song finished itself a week or so later when the president came out and gave his extraordinary success speech. Again, that scared me. I was in fear for not just Afghanistan, but what that meant for the future. And we can talk about the future because now we're living the future. But I still had hope because I've spent my career, I spent the last 20 years singing for our troops. I have great respect for our military. And I expected General Milley and General Austin to come clarify the extraordinary success line, because I've always felt that, you know, our presidents can be crazy. They can be Orwellian. Everything's driven politically. But if it gets really bad, our generals will give us the straight scoop, the straight, honest opinion of what's happening. But when they came out, Milley and Austin, and basically just echoed the political narrative of the president, I was angry. I was scared. I wrote the rest of the song that night. I recorded it the next day, and I put it out.
And this is no like kind of, hey, I think I know what he's talking about there. I mean, this is a in your face, screw you. I mean, you know, opening up with, you know, I know you have a couple of video versions of it, opening up with the press conferences and these guys. This was, you know, this was 60s era. I'm trying to think of the last time I've seen kind of that from a popular well-known artist, that kind of a, not like being protesting against hunger, but like protesting something that's going to make a lot of people, it's going to get under their craw.
I figured I had to name names, and
Right.
it was a moral exercise for me, not a political one. And I've said this many times. I've talked to you about it. If Donald Trump were president, or George Bush, or we were in the same position, the song would remain the same. Only the names would change. But it was President Biden's decision, and it was Milley and Austin's decision not to resign. And it was Secretary Blinken's decision to go out there and play Baghdad Bob and say, oh, our allies are fine with this, the day after Parliament condemned our withdrawal. So I figured it was important to call out the folks who caused this. And to this day, there's been no accountability. It was not mentioned in the State of the Union. I think Ukraine, they're hoping will, continue to sweep Afghanistan under the rug. But it is a great moral shame for our nation. And beyond the humanitarian cost, the moral cost, I think we're seeing the national security cost before our eyes.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly see that when bullies go after weak people. They don't go after somebody who's going to smack them right back in the face. And when every single time in American history when we've had a president who's, not been a tough guy, bad shit's happened. I mean, that's.
I mean, you look at Obama's red line, right? You look
Right.
at Obama in Crimea. I think all that stuff, when George Bush was president and Putin went into Georgia, George Bush, love him or hate him, sent Condoleezza Rice to the capital of Georgia and said, Russia, get out of here. I don't think Blinken's going to Kiev anytime soon. But, it's and certainly, Putin's been planning this for years, and it's not only due to Afghanistan, but if you're Putin or Xi or Iran and you're looking for a window to make your move, it's not surprising that they're doing it now with President Biden. If you abandon your citizens to terrorists, the Taliban, why would he think that we would stand up to anything? And I think we've seen that. He's been a follower on all of the sanctions and all of the methods to kind of stifle Putin. We tend to be like, following whatever the EU does or following whatever the public says on energy. So it's a scary time. And I think Taiwan's probably the next domino to fall, but it's really disappointing. And more disappointing than the president is the military, the generals, Milley and Austin, who did not do the honorable thing and resigned, because they know that they're on the wrong side of history.
Their defense is, holy shit, we put billions and billions of dollars in here. We thought the guys could hold on for a couple months. Right. But I don't recall much fighting. I mean, did ISIS actually have to fight to win, or did they just kind of walk in? So a good friend of mine is Holly McKay, who was actually in Afghanistan as all this stuff, she scared the shit out of us because, she decided to stay there like a journalist. And fortunate for her, when she did decide to come out of the country, Taliban was actually pretty cool to her. They were like, she didn't have problems with it there. Now, who knows how that'll change? And I think the Taliban is going to be a lot meaner and more evil to the people in Afghanistan as opposed to screwing up with the Americans. But she was kind of shocked at how fast it came, and what she saw happening, at least in her city, I forget, it was up in the north, I forget which city it was literally the Taliban came up to the mayor of the town and said, look, not this Americanized, but they said, there's two ways this can go. We can come and we can kill you, kill all your family, and we're going to win. With the Americans, we were unstoppable and we were going to win. Now without them, it's only a matter of time. Or here's some money, take care of your family, get a house out here and lay down all your arms and give us all that military equipment. And all of those guys fell one at a time.
Yeah, no, again, I think certainly I'm no military expert, but talking to folks in the know, first of all, when Kabul fell in a week, as we're seeing with Ukraine, wars have logistics and supply chains, and they don't happen overnight. And I think people on the inside have told me, look, we saw this for months. They were organizing, they were activating. Of course, there were infiltrations, but the main thing they tell me was abandoning Bagram. When you abandon Bagram, you abandon, and the same thing we're seeing in Ukraine. Bagram gave us air superiority over Afghanistan. And that's really all you need to support the Afghan army. And maybe you need 1,000, 2,000 troops there that would let the Afghan army have some feeling that they're not alone in this. Again, who knows? We don't know alternate history, but the other thing is, let's assume that that's right, that we were taken aback by that, and all of our information was wrong. In a sane world, those people in CIA or in operations, there'd be consequences for them.
Right.
They would probably lose their job. If you're the general that organized this, you might lose your job. On the other hand, if you're General Milley and you say, well, I told the president this was going to happen, and I said leave 3,000 troops, but he went against my advice, and I'm going to resign to let somebody have this seat that agrees with him. How many generals resigned under Donald Trump? Was it 200? I don't know. But every time a general resigned under Donald Trump, the media and everybody was like, oh, this is great. The general's doing the right thing. But the most ironic thing I saw, I'll never forget when Tom Cotton was grilling Milley in Austin in the hearing, when he said, why didn't you resign? And Milley said, well, that would have been a political act. When the whole idea of staying was a political act. The guy's been a political actor his whole career. So again, I think, we can argue about the withdrawal. What did we know? Did the army fail? But what we do know is there's been no accountability, and this narrative of what a great airlift we had, what extraordinary success, was truly Orwellian and insulting, and especially to Afghan veterans. And you asked how did I get into the deep stuff with Afghanistan, the evacs. When the song came out, I got thousands of emails from Afghan veterans who were so angry, so ashamed that their government, their generals had abandoned the Afghan soldiers who fought with them, sometimes saved their lives, to the Taliban. Can you imagine that? You'll remember the suicide rates for veterans skyrocketed, the suicide hotline, the PTSD is still going on. So through that, I started meeting many of these evac orgs, which is the one shining light of this whole debacle. And they actually allowed me to join some of their calls, be embedded with some of their groups, because I was getting emails from people trapped in Afghanistan. Can you please, this is how absurd Monty Python this is that because our State Department was not rescuing or doing anything to help our citizens and allies, they were emailing some singer because they were desperate. And I would basically forward it to these groups. So So I was able to sit in with them, and it was so, and it continues to be, because we do it every week. I'll have another one on Friday, to watch these folks, mostly veterans or their families, between going to soccer practice, going to work, they're organizing these evacs, they're raising millions of dollars, they're negotiating with the Emirates to get lily pads. To watch them in action, keeping the American promise, is so inspiring. And in this really cynical time, it does give me hope for who we are. Because I know I've spoken to you in the past about the big picture. Who are we as a nation? Are we do we abandon our citizens to terrorists? Do we basically allow Putin to walk into a free nation? Or are we the country of Normandy and the Berlin Wall coming down? And I think that tipping point is yet to be decided.
So Afghanistan, so it's not a matter of logistics. Right now, I'm assuming, and you know 5 times more than me on this, but you'd mentioned this before when we chatted. It is kind of a measure of who do we now let into the country? Because you have a U.S. citizen who was maybe an Afghan who got U.S. citizenship. Now, maybe he's got a wife, or maybe he's got a family of 17 people, what are the rules? How do they figure that out? And, because they also want to make sure that they're preventing just a few ISIS guys to slip in under that. Hey, I'm Ahmed's cousin here. And all of a sudden, we've got bigger fish to fry. How does that work?
Yeah, it's certainly complicated. And you're right. There are hundreds of heartbreaking stories when you hear of, a father gets to the plane. He has a family of 8, and they say, well, you can only take 5, and he has to choose, which of his family members escape and which are left to be killed. And I have many stories where they were killed.
Wow.
I think that at the end of the day, talking to the evac folks, for the most part, the State Department has been egregiously not doing their duty because I think they want to go away. It's not even about coming to America. It's about let's get these people vetted so they can go to other countries. So many countries, as I said, the Emirates, Qatar, Portugal, go down the list, will take refugees. But the State Department, out of, I think I saw 70,000 folks who qualify for either SIV, P1, P2s, which means they have worked with us, they've been vetted.
Right.
I think only 3 or 4% have gotten out. So again, I think it almost might be a greater shame than the withdrawal itself, is the fact that the State Department has neglected vetting the people that we promised to protect to get them to these other countries. And a lot of them aren't coming here. Many of them, as I said, are going to other countries. And if you talk to the evac folks, that their anger at the State Department, I think, is even eclipses that for the president, because they're there, they have everything in place, but there's not folks. We spent trillions of dollars for Build Back Better and these insane programs. You can't spend $5 million to hire 100 more state accountants to go through this stuff. It's just egregious. And again, I think history will reflect that on Secretary Blinken and the State Department.
I remember being in Iraq for Fox when it was kind of the bad time after the main battle. This was like 2005, 2006. We were hunkered down, and we had a bureau there. This was the rebellion time was pretty serious, and when you have Americans there, whether it's military or whether it's news organizations, you interact with a lot of locals who get you your food, get you your gasoline, get your car, driving your, how do you buy a car in Baghdad? Well, you don't, other people do. So you're kind of surrounded by this group of locals. And, I remember when Obama was thinking of just yanking it all out, there was some discussions of how, we don't want these wars to last forever, how quickly to go down that. And you're like, man, I know now that these guys that I know are going to die because when the bad guys win and take over, everybody in town knows who helped the infidel. And it was like, these guys were literally risking their lives trying to make their country a better place. And I've never had to do that for America. I mean, some of my forefathers did, but I never had to be like, okay, I can either choose to get out or just pretend like I don't know what's going on here, or put your life at risk. And then to think, and when you know these guys' names and you see their faces and know that they're screwed if it goes south. I understand how these soldiers, especially some of them were probably had their lives saved by these guys and worked hand in hand. This is going to be, every day that goes by, though, people are going to care less and less about Afghanistan. How do you kind of keep that? And in fairness, there's a war going on where they blew up a hospital and all that. How do you see it playing out, or how do you kind of pop that back into consciousness again, do you think?
It's hard. And, certainly I don't, diminish Ukraine, though at the same time, I think we're seeing two of the greatest humanitarian disasters in our generation happening at the same time. 2 million refugees out of Ukraine, and Afghanistan, mass starvation. And I think we're mature enough as a nation and as a planet to be able to address both of those issues at the same time. We're not. But it's hard. And, the fact of the matter is it's going to end bad for virtually all those people.
Right.
I'm on an atrocities chain. Just this morning, there was a policeman who used to work with us who was killed. And to your point about the folks that helped you in Baghdad, it's not just them, it's their families. So the Taliban basically kills families. And they'll go in and say, oh, you're the interpreter. Okay, you helped the Americans. You're dead. And so is your wife. And so is your children. And even to a greater extent, the national security issue of, we have 20,000 commandos we trained that are very sophisticated, great fighters. And the fact that we haven't tried to get them out, because they have a simple choice too. be killed by the Taliban or flip and join the Taliban, and we'll be fighting them in the next 4 or 5 years. Our boys will be fighting those that we trained. So the fact that we're not even
with our weapons
that we've equipped. So the fact that the administration is not even addressing that is I'm not going to say treasonous, but it's damn close. But it's going to be hard. We have some projects. We have another couple of video projects. We are going to do a concert for Afghanistan. But I think what I'm really focusing on now is there is some policy on the Hill, Afghan related, that Joni Ernst has been working with. The good news is there's actually be some consensus on the Hill about Afghanistan. And I have to give Senator Blumenthal, Senator Shaheen credit, who have not forgot about Afghanistan. Certainly Mike Waltz, one of my partners, congressman, first Green Beret ever elected to Congress, is not going to let it go. And many Democrats are not going to let it go. And I think once the midterms come and the Republicans take the House, you're going to see Afghanistan back in the news, because they're going to demand answers. They're going to hold people accountable. But it's going to be tough. I think what I'm really focusing on right now, beyond trying to get out, every person you save is someone you save. But we know we can't save them all. Is let our Afghan vets know that they're not forgotten. So the concert we're doing, some of the videos we're doing are really tailored to that audience, because I think they're the ones still suffering. They're the ones being neglected. Again, the fact that President Biden did not mention the 13 families of the soldiers killed in Kabul in the State of the Union was egregious. So we want to let them know, and all the Afghan folks know, that number one, we don't forget them, but history will make a judgment on this administration. And I think until there's some accountability, and for General Milley, General Austin, the president will have his accountability at the polls. These Afghan vets will never be able to have some closure. So that's where we're focusing now. But to give the evac org credit, they're not giving up. They're going above, around, underneath the State Department. They are getting people out. And whenever I see a picture of one of these Afghan families evacuated, it just, it gives me a little bit of hope. But the answer to your question is, it's going to end bad for many millions of people, especially women and children.
Can you get video? You said picture. Can you get video and pictures? And I'm sure they don't have. I'm sure most of the apps aren't working in Kabul right now, but that's just kind of a guess. I mean, is there a flow of information? Because once that gets shut off, it's like nothing happens at that point.
That's a good question. I really don't know. I do see pictures, and to be, it's your profession. There is some incredibly brave reporters down there still covering this, which is another story. And there's incredibly brave women's group who are still marching in front of the Taliban. So there are so many stories of heroism down there that we're just not seeing. I do get some pictures. I do get, some images. Of course, the arts has been completely shut down. Artists are basically outlawed.
They ban a lot of types of music, right?
They ban virtually all music except kind of their religious music. That's another thing we've tried to do is get some of the actors out.
How fucked up is that? It's just like the Nazis kept the opera going. These guys are banning kite flying and music and pizza. It's just Jesus. What kind of a society on that? So you said that's the first kind of time where you've gotten political in your. I mean, is that a big step forward in your? This is gonna ding. Is that a big step forward, kind of deciding that I'm going to take a political stance and intermix that with my art and with my profession? I mean, Sam Cooke, he's got a song, "Change is going to come," that only got popular after he was dead because he only sang it once, and he wouldn't let his publishers put it out as a single, because it's like, I don't want to lose my career over this. How does that go into your head at that point?
Yeah, I mean, when I wrote the song and recorded the song, I played it for some folks, and virtually everybody said, you can't put that out.
Right.
You're crazy.
Right.
And but then I it's funny. I thought about a couple people when that happened. I thought about our old friend Andrew Breitbart, who was a warrior and tended to put the health of the culture ahead of his personal ambition. I'm very lucky that I've had a nice career and been able to realize my childhood dream. I'm also on the backside of my career, so whatever consequences come my way really aren't going to change my life that much. I did have a talk with my daughter, because my daughter is at a very liberal school, and we see how folks can be bullied and ostracized in our colleges, even if it's their parent, saying something that doesn't fit with the political narrative of that school. I was very proud that she said, "Daddy, if I get a bad grade or people don't want to work with me because you're talking about people in Afghanistan and their struggle, I don't care about my grade and I want to be their friend." It was one of the most proudest moments I've had as a dad. I also thought of John McCain. I wrote a song 20 years ago called "The Last Great American." I was cynical 20 years ago. And it was about John McCain and whatever you think of McCain, when you have a guy who's willing to let other people leave before him when you're a prisoner of war, that means something. And I thought to myself, this is what political songs are supposed to do. I went back and listened to some Creedence stuff and Marvin Gaye and Dylan and even Neil Young, our friend Neil Young. And I don't put myself in that class, but I'm like, this is how music makes a difference. And I had no expectation for any reaction to my song, but I'm like, considering what the Afghans are going through, considering what John McCain went through, if I put this song out, or I get some, somebody says some mean tweets, or I lose a gig, or somebody doesn't want to buy a ticket, woe is me. And I still find that, it's still my attitude. Whatever thing comes my way is so trivial to the people I'm talking about and their plight.
You almost kind of, certain artists then just lean into it at a certain point because you might not have a choice.
Yeah. What I don't want to be is the political song of the week guy.
That's true.
There are some people that they found a niche, and it's kind of like conservative media. Like, you find a niche, you find a market, you find an audience. And I'm not saying they're doing it for any reason and that they don't believe what they're saying. But, for me, Afghanistan was different than our typical issues. It's different than, abortion or education, school choice, or even the border. Because at the border, we didn't promise those people that they could come here and we would take care of them. We did promise those people in Afghanistan. It's America's word, and America's word should matter. But I think we're seeing again, even in Ukraine, we told Ukraine, 30 years ago, give up your nukes, we got your back. Who's going to trust America now? I wouldn't, with Afghanistan and Ukraine. So, as I said, I think the consequences of where we're at are scary. And the American promise, as Vice President Saleh said at the end of my Blood in My Hands video, it's a mirror to ourselves. It's like, why would anybody trust us? America is no longer the great light.
I'm a little bit more optimistic and a little bit less critical of us in Ukraine. I mean, it took a couple days for the White House. They're like, shit, gas is going up. You know what that means at the polls. Now they'll one of the first things he did was virtue signal left and right about slowing down drilling, about stopping new fracking, about stopping pipelines. And so they knew that was going to get hammered to them. But I got to say, I've been overall, and I could nitpick all of it, I think America's response in this has been pretty darn good. I mean, we've gotten them, first of all, we have gotten them a ton of armaments. We trained a ton of Ukrainians. I mean, they're the ones out there dying in the streets, but they're also shooting missiles that were made at Lockheed at people. And we're also sharing almost real-time information with them. we put the economic screws on Russia more than I thought we would. I didn't think that both the country and, I think to their credit, a lot of corporations, McDonald's pulled out recently, a lot of them are just saying, we're not going to do this anymore. So I don't know if I'm China, maybe, hopefully, I'm looking and saying, that thing was supposed to be Crimea too. He was supposed to march in there. Zelensky was gone would be gone in a few days. We chop off the head. We do all that. By the time the West realizes, or by the time the West takes a strong look at it, we're already in. We've got the tanks in Central Square, and everybody's cool. This is not going the way that they'd anticipated that, and hopefully, that's a signal that between the world and the West that China might not have quite as easy as a time as they think they would.
No, I don't disagree with you. I certainly don't have the visceral anger toward the administration of Ukraine that I do for Afghanistan.
Right.
That said, I think their actions in Afghanistan certainly exacerbated where we are now, and gave Putin no cause. I wish we were a little more on the leadership front instead of following the EU every time and asking permission to the EU if we can cut off Russian oil. I do think the fact that they won't address the energy is awful. But of course, it looks like they're being dragged kicking and screaming to the right side of history. I think even today there was a glimmer that maybe the Keystone, they'll look at that. But no, I agree with you. And I do think the counter argument that if Xi was looking to make a move, I don't think it has anything to do with this administration's response. I think it has to do with the world's response. Mm-hmm. That if they, if they feel that, oh boy, okay, we're going to lose Nike, we're going to lose Apple, we're going to lose all these, economic tentpoles of our economy. I think that scares them more than Biden. And yes, it's nice that McDonald's and Coke left. Of course, again, they were dragged kicking and screaming, being shamed to do it. But I think, seeing the world's reaction, seeing hundreds of thousands of people in European capitals, seeing the kind of the visceral reaction of just ordinary citizens. I mean, you're the expert in the digital age, watching, a mom in Ukraine with an AK-47 and 3 kids there say how she's going to, die for her country. I think that's giving Xi some pause. Mm-hmm. And of course, it wouldn't be nearly as easy for Xi. Taiwan can actually have the resources to fight back. But you may be right. And again, I hope, one man, Zelensky, one man is showing us that one man can change the world. And his spine and his courage has kind of shamed the rest of the Western leaders to move to the right side of history. And we may get lucky in this. They may find some, little bit of an off ramp for Putin, maybe let him keep the 2 independent states. Right. And we get lucky. But hopefully the world's learned its lesson. And like Germany's doing, like most of Europe is doing, like Japan is doing, and reevaluating their place on the world stage, maybe we can have some sense of sanity in this country and open up our energy so we're not dependent, and Europe is not dependent on these, on these evil people. Yeah. But
although when you think of the economic dependencies that we have on China, I mean, look, if Russia disappeared,
yes,
gas goes up a little bit as it was doing anyhow. And what else do we? Oh, it's a couple brands of vodka. I don't get. Yes. I mean, when's the last time he was like, oh, hey, this was made in Russia? Never. But China, that we have industries here that shut down. I mean, whether it's rare earth, all sorts of shit. I mean, it's
we have a family business too. We don't export much, but so many of our suppliers and customers, they're basically wed to China. But it'll really, be fascinating to see the moral spine of America in the next 10 years after this event.
Right.
Because what's going to happen, as soon as this is over, whatever, people like me will be, screaming, all right, Coca-Cola, Nike, Apple, you were dragged kicking and screaming to do the right thing in Russia. What about the million Uyghurs?
Yeah, we don't care about them. Right.
You have no, especially the ones like Coke, who like to lecture us about their moral bettership and insert themselves into Georgia voting rights and tell us how racist we are. Right. it'll be interesting to see
if that
fallout.
changes that. Yeah.
Yeah, probably won't, but we'll see. Yeah.
See, we were talking about Zelensky. So clearly a brave guy. Clearly a large majority of politicians would have said, we're going to set up our government in exile in Warsaw, and I'll be texting over across the border and doing that. And there's a good chance that he's going to end up dead within the next week or two or month or whatever. I mean, he's a guy, when Putin goes to bed at night, he doesn't want to murder anyone more than he wants to murder Zelensky. That's historically not a good place to be in life, right?
Right.
But what I couldn't also get over, and I don't want to get your thinking on this, was Zelensky, I think because he was a performer, also understood how to do a number of things that a lot of politicians don't understand. And it was set up. It was what he wears. It was the things that he spoke with. It was the personalized nature. When you look at it as a guy who's been up on a stage and if you're not interesting, you stop making money. What do you notice when you see what do you think he got from being a performer that he's turned into being in the theater of leadership here?
That's funny. You're the first person who brought this up, and I've been thinking about this a lot. And I don't mean to trivialize the situation or his place in history. They'll 1,000 years from now, people will know his name. But I think being a comedian is a big part of his character, because to be a comedian, to walk on a stage, especially as a young comedian, takes a lot of balls, a lot of courage that many politicians probably don't have or will never have. You have to have a certain spine to do that, to be laughed at, to be rejected, to throw a tomato in your face, and so
you need a solid ego.
Yes, you do, and not to say that every comedian is going to become Winston Churchill, but I think you have that base. I saw him on one of their Dances with the Stars, right? The guy's certainly not afraid to take big swings,
right,
and put himself out, and he's not afraid to fail, and obviously he's not afraid to go down with the ship. And I also think when you're an actor, you're a part of a collaboration. It's not always about you. It's about your cast, your team. You have to have a certain humility, which many of our politicians don't. I think you look at the leaders of the G7, you look at Trudeau, they're very weak, they're very arrogant. They think they're better than you. Nothing they do is wrong.
They're European.
And of course, and as you said, if they're invaded, they're on the first train out. And I think when he said, when America, who I think Biden, I think America, their whole plan was, let's just manage the fall of Ukraine. When we said, all right, we'll get you out. And he said, no, man, I don't need a ticket. I need some guns. I need some ammo.
Right.
I didn't think they know how to respond to that, because that's not who they are, but although
I do think that our government leaked that out to help make him look good.
Well, good. I tend to be pretty cynical, and I do believe that you're right. We're doing a lot of things under the radar that we should be doing, and I don't want to discount that. But yeah, I think his history as an entertainer, performer, courage, certainly, and his wife, who was an actor, I think it gives him a different perspective. Also, as you said, he's very good at playing the part. He's very good at playing the media. How the hell he looks like he slept 10 hours a night every time he's on one of these Zooms. I don't know how he's doing that. Maybe he has a clone, but he certainly is a figure. I wrote a song about him last night. I don't know if I'll ever put it out. But he is, to me, a generational figure of courage and freedom that should go down with the Washingtons and the Churchills of the world.
Well, we'll give him a year.
I know, but I'm an artist.
And then we're going to find out that he called some group the wrong name, and then we rip his statute down.
The wrong pronoun. Yeah.
Well, but mastering the arts of communication. I mean, certainly Trump also who was an entertainer as
Yeah.
much as he was a builder in life,
Yeah.
understood how to play that game. Ronald Reagan was, I remember back in the day when it was Ronald Reagan, it's like, oh my gosh, are we really going to elect an actor? And,
Yeah.
that was a quainter, simpler time, but he was somebody who knew how to communicate. And I think that's what turns good leaders into generational leaders. You read Winston Churchill's speeches today, I've watched Gary Oldman be Winston Churchill probably 5 times in that movie. All right, but let's take a jump on that, because I speaking of Gary Oldman, I know he was one of the few non-lefties in Hollywood, and he was part of the thing that I know Andrew was involved in starting, and it was the Friends of Abe, which I want to say started. What did it start in the early 2000s? Was it post September 11th that Friends of Abe started? Or was it a little earlier?
It was definitely in the Bush years.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, it was. For a decade, it was like you can't talk about the Illuminati, but I was I think I was the first musician, and it was an incredible group. It was basically started by some acters.
Gary Sinise was a big part of that.
Well, we don't talk about.
We don't
Gary.
talk about that.
Gary is basically Bob Hope. Gary's focus is Bob Hope. But there were some actors that just wanted a community of folks that maybe didn't share the far left view of most of Hollywood, that people could come to and just speak their piece without fear of losing their livelihoods.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just, actors that it was cameramen, it was makeup artists, it was DPs, directors, it was then musicians started coming, and then it was songwriters, and it was really an incredible thing that really could only happen in America, and grew to a couple thousand people and did a lot of events and had a lot of great times together. And when Andrew Breitbart kind of came in after the first year, he was just a powder keg of energy, and he'd wrote a book about Hollywood and the media and the culture there. And I think when he saw there was this counterculture, he really found his people, he found his family, and he gave us energy, and I think we gave him energy. And one of the great sad things of his passing was, I think when we lost Andrew, Friend of Abe's kind of lost its muse. And it was never quite the same. But boy, those years we had with him and the adventures we had, and to watch him kind of fight the culture war, were some of the greatest days of my life. And a lot of those folks are still dear friends, and we still get together. We still get together and talk about that. And a lot of the folks, that kind of came from Andrew's tree that that are kind of basically conservative media now, were young kids at some of those FOA dinners and events, and to see where they are now, just
a lot of them work directly for Andrew. You see Ben Shapiro, you see
Jeremy, go down the list. But they to see what legacy he has, just turn on the television or open up your computer, and it's not just Breitbart.com. It's virtually all those folks who are taking his lead and fighting the culture war. Because I still think our side doesn't get it. They don't understand the power of the arts.
He was the first one to, even though I was in the midst of media, I mean, I was a decent muckety-muck at Fox News, to really say, look, to really explain how elections were downstream of culture, and how it was education, media, and entertainment kind of feeding into those things. And he was righter than he was one of the very first persons to really understand that. And for him, the savior was the internet. And because Andrew had ADD times 5, right?
Oh, God.
And so, I mean, if it wasn't for the internet, Andrew probably still would have been a waiter bouncing off the walls and doing things. But then the internet came in, and all of a sudden it just kind of meshed into his ADD, and he could control the thing. What he didn't live to see was the censorship in the internet take over. He, you
Yeah.
know, from at that point in the fight, it was like the internet is our savior. It's the Wild West. It's where people can, you know, you don't have to have the gatekeepers of CBS or Paramount Pictures or whomever that is, and it was so disappointing to see the rise of the censorship culture growing up in the internet. I've always wished somebody would start something similar to Friends of Abe in Silicon Valley, because Silicon Valley is just as nasty as Hollywood when it comes to that. And but on the other hand, Friends of Abe did kind of peter out it a little bit. Is that still needed in Hollywood? Is it and yes or no on that? But where then what does that say to like kind of let the young people in Silicon Valley who aren't marching lockstep with the ideology there, how do you help them out? I mean, they're as much as refugees almost as some of the guys in Afghanistan. It's like, Jesus.
No, I think you're right. And you know, to your point with Andrew and cancel culture, you know, I want a Man in the High Castle to another universe and see what happened if Andrew didn't pass away, because Andrew was better than anybody at exposing the hypocrisy of the left,
right?
Where he could actually move the needle of the culture. And of course, the left now is big tech, it's mainstream media. And he was so smart and so innovative in doing that. I wonder if maybe cancel culture wouldn't be quite as bad if he was here. We'll never know.
Right.
But he was one of the few people that we just couldn't replace. There was just, they didn't have his savant kind of way to manipulate the media and expose the media.
He was kind of like a Saul Alinsky of the right. And he was a student of Saul Alinsky.
Oh my God. He started quoting that to me when we first met. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Because as you know, Andrew was a liberal. And basically what radicalized him was the Clarence Thomas hearings, when he saw this guy get a witch trial. And he's like, that's not right.
Right.
And he saw the media play into that. So he was not a political person by nature. He was actually a big music fan. He knew about more independent music than I did. He'd tell me about the next cool band.
Right.
But I don't know, you know, I think in Hollywood it's still bad. But, you know, I think with every voice that comes out, you know, one reason I wanted to put the song out, not because I'm, you know, big old rock star, but it sounds almost true, but every little voice gets permission. And I do think we're starting to see a little bit of pushback. I certainly with Youngkin and Virginia and the critical race theory with the parents standing up. I think, you know, with Neil Young going after Joe Rogan and people standing up against that. Right. And I think one thing that's not a silver lining, but a reality about Ukraine and Afghanistan is when you have these big geopolitical issues that define the times, and you really see evil people doing evil things, I think it exposes the left in the kind of shallow nature of the culture war. It's like, you know, when I talk to veterans in Afghanistan about their brothers that were left behind, you know, they'll say, you know, we didn't care about the pronoun of the person fighting next to us. We didn't care about their sexuality. So I think maybe what's happening will help with the culture war. But no, Silicon Valley, maybe they have one, maybe they don't. I wish Elon Musk would start one, because that guy seems to have a little bit of sanity. But yeah, so many people still, you know, fear for their livelihoods. And when I put the song out, you know, when YouTube took the song down, you know,
okay, so tell me about that. It's a crazy story.
So you know, I made a video basically to the song. It wasn't really my opinion, as you said. It was news clips telling the story. I played the song from the White House. I had Salah say a few words, put it out. And YouTube initially put a child restriction warning on it, which I appreciated because there were Taliban atrocity images. And it was fine, and it was going viral. And then all of a sudden, some senators started tweeting it. And then about 10 days later, YouTube took the song down for graphic warning issues. And of course, you know, the first thing I did was Google Taliban atrocities and found 20 YouTube videos with images much worse than mine. I think I talked to you. I talked to some other people. And eventually they were shamed to put it back only because there was a national outcry. But again, how many musicians stood up for me? One, John Rich. And I even reached out some other country artists, folks who are not on the radical left, who are kind of known for being patriots and advocates of free speech. I reached out to their camps. I'm like, you guys, whether you like the song or not, this is important. And no, it's too controversial. Afghanistan's too controversial. I got more requests from Russian propaganda media, from RT, RT, than I did from, Rolling Stone or the music outlets to talk about music censorship. So that just shows how paralyzed the arts are and how scared people are to even support songs like mine when we're on the same side of the aisle. So to me, that's very chilling, and I'm not sure how we come out of that.
I mean, I'm starting to see a little bit of hope on the tech side because the profit motive.
Yes.
I mean, we've seen some companies are starting to get some good funding. Some have done some reverse merger SPACs on Wall Street, like Trump's. We'll see. He still hasn't gotten that off the mat right now, but he's got a few $100 million to play around with that. So I mean, I know it's been declared DOA after his first week up. Literally, it's like Vanity Fair is like, well, look at his numbers. It's like. It's just it's like I can't even get on it right now because they're still plugging all the wires in the back thing.
Right.
But when it was the Rumble CEO said, "Hey Rogan, if they cancel you here, bring your shit over here, and we'll match the $100 million." Now it turns out it might have been $200 million from Spotify, but that was a big moment because that's where it said, "All right, now this isn't just some little guys in a garage trying to help out somebody, but if we couldn't play in the same sandbox as the Silicon Valley primarily left, that the concept that an alternate point of view, or at least a certain, and they'll change and some will fail and some will morph back into what they said they'd never be, because it's hard to run. Look, it's hard to run an online portal or an online social media thing, because you always have to censor a little bit. Otherwise, you get spam in. You get people you get honest to God Nazis. I don't think there's all that many in America, but they do exist. Yeah. And so it's like, you have to figure out how to do. But then when I hear something like your thing coming, it's like, look, you can watch people be murdered left, right, and center on YouTube. There are thousands and thousands of videos of people going to their death. And the concept that yours was singled out is it's all about virtue signaling in politics, and it's going to get worse again in the next. So assuming that our crystal balls, we kind of know what we're looking at. We assume that Republicans will take over at least one of the houses, and probably the House. But then the media goes back into, if Trump runs again, the media goes back into anything that can help him at all is the equivalent of helping a Nazi in 1933 Germany. And so they will go right to the wall again. I mean, they calmed down a little bit on him when he just took a 6 months powder going off, and they'll be right back in the midst of things. So that's not good coming up.
I agree with you. And I kind of don't understand it. YouTube didn't put the song back up because there was any economic damage to them. It was because they just didn't want a little bad press. They wanted to get out of the media. And you're right. They have a monopoly. Big tech has monopoly on the platforms. And I don't understand, why there's not more investment from, these billionaires, Elon Musk, for example, to create their own platforms. When YouTube took the song down, I did throw it up on Rumble and got 30,000 views within a few hours. So there's people there. It's something to grow. And also, I mean, just look. I mean, you worked at Fox News for how many years? It's a gold mine. Can you imagine?
It can be. Yeah. Look. Yeah. Media bias bought my house.
Yes.
It's like so.
Yeah. So and there's so. Yeah. You'd think if somebody did a sane Twitter, and I'm not talking about a right-wing Twitter, just a Twitter that that doesn't allow Putin to have an account and Trump not to, or a Facebook or a YouTube that is not just run by radicals. You think there'd be a great payoff in that, and I don't understand why somebody's not really diving down and putting the resources in to build that platform.
I think you'll start to see some of it. I think some of them have tried. I mean, Parler was doing pretty well until it got kneecapped by Apple and Apple and Amazon on the same day. There was one other company as well on that. Yeah, and that was one of the most horrific things I ever saw. That was like watching a murder. It was because after how often do you hear how often do you hear the left saying, just build your own thing?
Yeah,
Twitter's
right.
a private company. You could do this. They
Yeah.
did build their own thing, and then the powers that be, zapped them down for completely bullshit reasons too. It was like, well, it was you. You had something to do with the insurrection on January. And it was just like, okay, that you were just waiting for a reason to kill them.
Yeah.
Those guys couldn't get off the mat. They're completely done. The other tricky part is when you start up and you're like a Gab, for instance. What you first do is you first attract all the people who've been thrown off of Twitter. Now, a lot of them are guys like you and me who said something like, "Oh, it looks like a girl," and so we're zapped out. And a lot of them are just the guys who are just too big assholes to. I mean, it's like there is a percentage of that.
There's nut jobs. Yep.
But I think more and more you're seeing, you're going to see, and I think we all have to help it as much as we can to allow those guys to be profitable on that side of the aisle.
Totally with you.
Look,
totally
Mel Gibson made $300 million because nobody would finance Passion of the Christ, and he did it himself. I mean, that wasn't too bad.
No.
It was funny. When I was researching that, I also found out that Charlie Chaplin had to finance The Dictator.
What?
Because when he first went in to make, what's turned out to be the movie against Adolf Hitler, it was a little too early. And there was a lot of pro-German forces in the United States. There was a lot of there was certainly a lot of we still had the reaction to World War II. So you had a lot of people saying we've done this game. We send our kids off to go die in a battle from some big Risk game in Europe, and they didn't come back, and it looks all the same. But it created an economic opportunity, and so hopefully that's the same.
I hope so. The culture needs it, and these tech platforms and the media needs to be held accountable. I mean, it'll be very interesting. What do you think CNN's going to do? Do you think they're actually going to come back to the middle and try to actually have a business that makes money, or are they going to kowtow to their current audience?
So the guy who has been tapped to run it has made some conciliatory statements, or at least those have been interpreted by people who know him as saying he wants to tack to a little bit more pure news. He wants to stop getting at a direct food fight with Fox News because they keep losing. Here's the dirty secret in that, though, is they did that partially because of politics, but they did that because it was the financially smart model to do. I mean, look, when Fox News started off, we saw the country as always. I mean, the country's been divided almost 50-50 left-right since you and I have been born, right? I mean,
Correct.
Every presidential election has been within 5 or 10 points, right? So the country's always that. And the media was I would say, when Fox started off 25 years ago, it was 15, 20 degrees to the left. It wasn't crazy. It wasn't MSNBC. It wasn't rah like CNN has turned out to be. And when we started off, we were like, okay, we're going to be 15 degrees to the right. Of course, they all said, oh my gosh, you're a bunch of crazy reactionaries and what on that. Because from their point, everything to the, we did look crazy to us. We just happened to be closer to the center of American mass, which is why we made, trillions of dollars there. But over the years, even there, and the internet has something to do with, but it's also just people like getting news they like and getting news that they don't make, doesn't make them think too hard. That doesn't upset their. So it's like, remember the show Hannity and Combs? Well, you know what? When they dumped Combs, the liberal, Hannity's numbers went up, and so all of a sudden we went from a channel that had the morning show where they're just talking and having fun, and the evening prime time. That then all of a sudden you started getting where prime time, where you had the talkers and you had the Bill O'Reilly, you had Sean Hannity. Now you see that peppered more throughout the news day. And those shows, when you were a straight news anchor, you looked off and you were like, why are those guys making twice as much money as me, and why are they getting twice as much? So it's like people got the news they deserved to some extent. And then when the internet came out, it just, you didn't have to sell a newspaper. You had to sell, every story had its own headline. So it's like, when I ran FoxNews.com, we actually had, and everybody has, all the big guys have this. When you would write up an article, you would have your editor write 3 or 4 headlines for it. And those headlines would be computer-wise served out to a couple thousand people. and whatever one clicked the best, that was the one that then got served out to the rest of the people.
You'd focus group your headlines.
But it was in real time in a computer thing, and it
it's amazing.
It absolutely. Well, but you got to be careful on that, right?
Yeah.
Because nuanced, a story that said Trump got some things right and some things wrong as president. Nobody clicks on that. It doesn't get shared on Twitter. It does. You don't send it off. Think of the last time even you sent something off to your buddy on that. It's like you normally do. It's like, oh my God, they just turned a 2-year-old transgender, and that's what you send up, and those things click. So, so there's a heavy financial mix into this as well. I think CNN went to the left originally because, well, they were always at the left. They went harder core, as Fox went harder core to the right too. I mean, they both kind of did that, and being that straight news, I don't know how well that would sell right now. Now, I hope that we kind of mature as a society, and I hope that some of that stuff works, because it's created a thing where, I can't find real stories to certain, like I love Breitbart, right? And I love Breitbart.com, but you read it and they're clearly coming off from such a, when they use the word Hillary, if a story says Hillary and her cronies in it, it's like, okay, I know where this is coming from. And now it's like, they're not lying, but I bet they left some important things off the table that I have to now go to CNN to find out what that was. And, we can more easily do that than when we were 20 years old and all we could get is the LA Times or some things. So I don't know where the media is going. I still think it's got some ugly paths before it gets there.
No, my favorite show was Crossfire. Remember back in the day, Crossfire? Because I learned a lot.
Right.
I didn't know what to expect.
Right.
And at the end of the episode, they shook hands. And it was, and I think as a society, we've lost that, and we're seeing the results of that, in the culture and frankly, who we elect. Yeah. I think there's good argument. The past president and the current president are really not fit to be president, but we become so skewed and so tribal that we really just hate the other guy. It doesn't matter who ours is. But do you see anybody in the media I kind of look at the Wall Street Journal as someplace where I go that I don't know what they're going to say exactly. With most media, as you said, you go to the website, you basically write their own stories. You know what their narrative is going to be. But, I do look at the Wall Street Journal sometimes as kind of straight shooters. Do you see anybody else trying to kind of find the nuance in the culture and the news?
So a lot of them are good if you stay away from politics and culture, right? I mean, a lot of them are good when it's on science, although even them, you found out that, you read it and you're like, Jesus, and you have to scratch certain parts of it out. There is no single source that I go to that it's like, I feel comfortable. I have a tab on my computer that I'll open up 15 websites and I'll go cruising through that. I do find that like for kind of centrist but not nasty conservatism, I'll go to Brit Hume's Twitter page, for instance. Yeah, he gets some stuff in there. He was not a heavy Trump guy, so he didn't drink all that Kool-Aid on theirs. So there'd be a handful of people. I'll look at some of the ones who came crossover, who like a Glenn Greenwald is. Now you know where he's going to come. He is liberal. He is anti kind of serious projection of American power, which we've been in a lot of wars since we've been alive. And who would have thought Afghanistan lasted 20 years? I mean, I would have given you odds that wasn't going to happen, that 20 years later we were still going to be shooting people in Afghanistan. But I tell you, look, so I'll give you one guy, and I wish he talked more about Joe Rogan. Yeah. I mean, to me, the one of the few bright spots, and it's why I started this podcast, one of the few bright spots in the whole media landscape was watching Joe Rogan, who I don't watch or listen to all that often, but it's like he could have a normal conversation like this. And it wasn't only that, but then it's like people dug it and people dug him. He wasn't intentionally trying to convince people that he was right on things or mislead them, and nobody believes that about CNN or even Fox, unless except for when you agree with them, you love them. When you don't, so some podcasts out there, but I don't know. Do you see any bright spots out there? Again, Wall Street Journal is I view them as pretty fair. They would be called conservatives by liberals, but I feel pretty good about them most of the time. But they're still kind of business.
Two that I've kind of subscribed to that I really appreciate who are liberals. Barry Weiss, for one,
right?
Who's the New York Times editor, who basically got canceled from the New York Times, who's been really good on free speech, and smart. And I don't agree with her on much of her politics, but she's honest. And Matt Taibbi's the other one. Used to write for Rolling Stone, and even he calls it, something that used to be a rock magazine. And he was actually kind of friendly adversaries with Andrew back in the day. And he also talks about free speech, and I don't know what he's going to say.
Right.
Andrew Sullivan, I think, can be interesting sometimes. Right. But you're right. It's really more the Substack people, Joe Rogan. The nice thing about Rogan, as opposed to virtually everybody we talk about, is, he could change his mind. He could say, I'm sorry, maybe I was wrong. Yeah. What media figure has come out and done that? What politician? Trump never apologized. Right. Biden has never apologized. We've forgotten this thing of people like, let's listen and maybe reconsider based on the evidence, not our tribal nature. So I agree with you. Rogan, I think, is a shining light. I was sad to see him kind of bend the knee, kiss the ring a little bit. Yeah. But again, that's kind of, I think, who he is, and he's not on a side. I think a lot of it
is the medium.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if Trump started apologizing, Trump wouldn't have been president. And I can't tell you how many times I've had like political consultants call me up and be like, he's fucking up. He's going to, he needs to, he finally did this. And Trump just kept like saying, the bigger of the more names that I call people, the higher I keep raising in the polls, and I'll stop doing it when it stops working. And it eventually did. If you recall, it eventually did. It was right after the convention, when he was too snotty with the one gal who had lost a son in the war, and he was like, I'm surprised. He trumped her, and that flipped on him. And that was the first time that he fired a couple people. He brought in a different team. He certainly wasn't blaming himself. But going back to the medium, I think is important, because not having more than just a sound bite, having one of the biggest things. I mean, I had a hit job on the New York Times did a hit job on me. I actually tried to come out. I started my news thing. I hired my former boss from Fox News, John Moody. I didn't hire him, but I pulled him in as a consultant and gave him a piece of company. A guy who was a big NPR editor, very lefty, Mike Oresky's, great guy on the left, but more about being fair and balanced and telling the truth as opposed to trying to get things done. And I still got wiped out. Well, first of all, it was hard to get attention, because not coming out with, it's easy just to come out with hardcore conservative stuff or hardcore liberal stuff. It's not easy to get that thing that's not centrist, that's just intellectually honest. And that's what drives me crazy when I watch the New York Times. And, they did a hit job on me, and basically it was like, if you're ever, and so, you're going to be Mr. Conservative from now on, that you just won't be accepted. You will be seen through that prism no matter what, because that's the way that prism looks at people. Which,
it's disappointing. We've lost nuance, and we've lost the ability to listen. And I've learned that over the last 3 months, actually, kind of for the first time, living in the world of conservative media and doing all these television shows. You got 2.5 minutes to do your rant, and you better say something somewhat provocative to get asked to come back. I mean, for better or worse, I'm getting a lot of these inquiries to come talk about Ukraine. And I'm like, there's probably people better talk about Ukraine.
No.
Maybe if I write a song about it.
You wrote a song about Afghanistan. What do you think about the Ukraine army and their...
it's because I was critical of the president, and I think deservedly so. And I also realized if the song was about Trump, I'd be, probably have the seat on The View right now. I understand that nature, but you're right. The age of nuance, where we have these longer conversations like we've had, in this hour and a half or so, I think that's where it has to go. That's the only productive medium. And I love to see Joe Rogan getting, $100 million
Yeah.
for having that platform and
Right.
making that. And again, it's great that you're doing this. I really enjoy these podcasts much more than the news hits, because they're actually constructive and we learn. And this is the only way America is going to get out of its culture war and its tribalism.
I saw Chris. So I was waiting. So my girlfriend is a reporter for the national Fox News channel. I don't watch a whole lot of TV, but when she's on TV, I try to get there for one of her hits. So I went on, and it was on a Sunday, and I was on the local channel, which was streaming Chris Wallace. So I thought I was watching the other channel. This was back during the Trump years, and it was when I was just getting into Rogan a little bit, and Chris was interviewing who was the press spokesperson for Trump, the blonde gal.
Kaylee?
No, the one with the husband who kept going after Trump all the time.
Oh yes. Oh God, I know. Right.
Kelly. Yes.
Yeah.
Conway.
Yes.
And he interviewed her for about 15 minutes. And it was clear that he, being Chris Wallace, who I generally like, I didn't like him at the debate, but he's a lefty who was generally pretty fair as a journalist. And he spent 15 minutes just trying to get her to admit that Donald Trump was an asshole. Right. It was like, well, the president said, right. Whatever. He said poo-poo caca, and I hate my mom. Yeah. Okay. Do you think that's bad? And then she would have to throw elbows and this. And I watched that thing for 15 minutes, literally not trying to. I was waiting for my girlfriend to come on TV because I was on the wrong channel. And I was like, I learned absolutely nothing from that. Whereas when I watched a Rogan with a presidential candidate and when he had Andrew Yang on, it was like, okay, that was the most I ever learned about Andrew Yang over the course of the course of the president. Didn't really dig him at the end of it. I liked him as a guy. I just thought his central part of giving everybody an allowance in the country might not be economically smart. That's where I go. So so it's the only bright spot. I hope we can dredge that out a little bit more.
No, I hope so. It's going to take some people that are committed and are going to have to really dig in, because as you said, the economics tend to not be there. But again, I think with all that's happening in this last year, so many huge things have happened that I think there are some people, should I dare say, waking up to be adults in this world with the consequences we're seeing and the things that are on the line, and maybe willing to put their biases and their tribalism aside a little bit. But I don't know. I don't know. We're so embedded that it's really going to take some courageous people to be able to do that. And it's on every one of us to at least listen to the other side. And
how do you do that on your personal level with your friends on the other side of the aisle?
Well, it's funny. I have a good buddy who is one of the greatest musical writers all times, very lefty, very liberal. And I remember when we first became friends, we actually wrote some songs together. When he found out my politics, he just couldn't equate in his mind how this person that he thinks is a decent person and maybe a nice guy could believe this evil, racist, sexist, genocidal stuff. Because of course he'd only been watching that one side, but he was decent and has a big heart to at least ask why. And we started to have these conversations, and so we are allowed to understand each other's perspective. And a lot of times we're like, oh, well, I understand why you feel that way. May not disagree. So I do have some folks that I have great relationships with, where we can actually have the discussions. And at the end of the day, if whether we change each other's minds or not, shake hands, give each other a hug, and understand that we basically want the same things. We just have different ways of going about getting there. And so I'm very fortunate to have some good friends like that. But it's tough. It's tough to find resources, in the news to get the other side, because the other side tends to be so toxic. It's never about information. It's about you're racist, you're sexist, you're transphobe. But as you said, that's what drives their clicks, and that's what cuts down the conversation.
So I live up in the Bay Area. So 90% of my friends are left of center, some very far left of center. I got a group of people who I've known for years now that from Burning Man.
Yeah.
And they kind of, they scratch my head. And I refuse to talk politics when I'm there, but I'll pull, sometimes they'll come aside and they'll ask that question. It's like, Ken, you really don't look like a Nazi. Do you hate gays? Is that part, and it's interesting. It really puts you in a different mindset when you're like, look, I really love this guy who I'm talking to. This love thy neighbor. This is a friend. I would go to bat for him. And he thinks goofy things, and he thinks I think goofy things, and so once in a while I'll squirrel off and grab a beer with one of them, and we'll talk about things. But it's funny because like that same guy though, if they text a headline or this or that, it's like I can't do it because they'll text. Well, what about Republicans on this? And I'll give I'll start to write the snarky answer like when you're in front of Twitter. I mean, Twitter's like it's fucking soul sucking. I mean, it turns you bad because it's like the snarkiest, jerkiest thing that you can come up with to zing the other side, or the lamest straw man argument, or you can find some crazy liberal anywhere or a crazy conservative everywhere, and so it's like some of them I'm like, I won't text you. Let's just go grab a beer or let's have a Zoom call and do it. And it works much better. It just always does.
No, you're right. If Dante was alive today, he'd definitely have a ring of hell for Twitter, and a lot of us would end up there. I despise Twitter, but I use it to the nth degree, and I don't like myself on Twitter because I tend to be cynical and snarky. I tend to be everything I hate. So I agree with you. I was talking to someone the other day, I think the pandemic really exacerbated the divide because so many of us were not socializing. We weren't having exactly what you're talking about, having a beer, communicating face to face, where we're not going to say certain things face to face that we would say on Twitter.
Right.
We'd have a certain respect for the humanity of the person.
Right.
But we were so basically, locked down in our rooms, angry, depressed. It just brought out the worst of us in social media. It just exacerbated the hellscape that is social media. So, I agree with you. I think the more we can just be together and have these conversations, it's just for our own well-being as human beings, in the culture too. But personally, for me, I try to do that as much as possible. And virtually all my friends, I live in California, as you did in San Francisco. It's the same with me. They're all 80, 90%, there ain't no blue dog Democrats in California. They're Marxist,
It's kind of fun though, I find sometimes, because sometimes you can actually. So when I talk with them, what I tell myself is I'm never going to try to convince anybody of what I think. I'm just going to tell them why I believe this.
Yeah.
And what I find is time after time, because of the division of the media, I can tell them things a perspective that they just hadn't heard. And it might have been as simple as I was at a party after a school shooting and a woman was like, how can anybody have a gun in America? And it was like, well, okay. And, walk through the Second Amendment, the concepts of it, historical, the percentage of likelihood that governments will end up killing you over time. And I was aided by the fact that Donald Trump was the president. And so it was like, and some people think that, to stop somebody like Donald Trump from becoming a dictator, maybe he shouldn't own all the guns. It was like, it was new information that they didn't hear by ever listening to kind of their own isolated silo. And I think we need more of that.
Yeah. And one thing I've actually been doing a lot with my friends in a very kind of subtle way is I've been using my experience in Afghanistan the last 3 months about these evac orgs and whenever they come at me with, well, your side or you're sexist, you hate women. I go, do you understand that the greatest women's rights decimation is happening right now in Afghanistan, caused by Joe Biden, and these girls are still not in school. And all of your heroes, your Elizabeth Warrens of the world, your AOCs, are saying nothing about that. Does that not bother you? And I think, again, Afghanistan exposed, I tell them about these evac or guys, a lot of them are Christians, white, Republicans, everything the liberals hate. And I said, I talked to him today. He just rescued two gay men from Kabul, because they're beheading gay people down there, and he doesn't care. He's just doing the right thing. Have you heard anything about gay rights in Kabul while you're arguing about pronouns? And they really have no answer. And
Right.
I think they're actually scratching their head, and they're understanding that so much of this virtue signaling, these human rights advocates, have nothing to do with actually helping people or social justice. It's a power play. And I'm not saying they're changing their mind, but they don't have a good answer to that, a good comeback.
Right.
And I think, you know, these big events in the world hopefully are having people maybe question their own narratives, as I question mine.
Hey, look, this war made me think, watching Putin say, this country next to me, and I'm not giving him props, but watching Putin say, this country next to me has become a strategic threat to my country, and I'm going to send troops in there. You know, it was kind of a flashback to 2002, 2003 Iraq.
Yes.
You know, because we were saying the exact same thing. And, you know, Saddam was a lot worse than this little Zelensky guy, but, you know, it was still, you know, we were dropping bombs on hospitals, and we were not intentionally killing civilians, but we killed thousands and thousands of people there because we felt threatened as a nation.
Yes.
And it made me think a lot of like, all right, now what do I really believe now that I'm seeing, you know, the same problem from two sides of the coin, you know, one on my side and one on the other guy's side. So, hey, so if somebody wants to get involved in helping out the Afghanistan stuff, what's the smartest thing for them to do?
No, I appreciate that. You know, we actually have a charity called whatkindaworlddoyouwant.com. I set it up years ago to help autism and ALS, and we've kind of pushed it into Afghanistan now. So if you want to make it easy, if you go to whatkindaworlddoyouwant.com, okay, you can donate there. It goes to actually a California community foundation. It's a 501c3, tax deductible. Those we. All I do is I filter your money to these various orgs.
Right.
But it's also very easy to just Google Project Exodus Relief, Pineapple, Argo. If you want to help these NGOs, every dollar you spend gets somebody out. It costs $5,000 to $10,000 to rescue one person, so it's very expensive. But more importantly, just don't forget about Afghanistan. Right. Don't forget about these people. Hold your elected representatives accountable. Do the right thing. You know, we're all Americans. It's a moral issue. Our promise matters. And if we just kind of turn the page and sweep them under the rug, who are we? And I think that alone is something we all can do.
Very good. Very good. All right, dude. Well, look, next time we get together, let's try to disagree about something.
I love learning about all the media. You know, it's fascinating to hear, you know, from you. It's so, again, just like Breitbart, I think, you know, to me, we can blame Biden, we can blame Trump. To me, it really goes to the media. And if we don't fix the media, we're going to
chunk of it. It's that, and but it's also us.
It's we vote. We
vote, we click, we forward, we call people names on Twitter, we do all this, but no, some ugly forces have made things a little rougher here. But
no, I think you're right. We all should look in the mirror first.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Ken.
Very cool. Yeah. All right, dude. Thanks again for your time. Let's do this again. All right.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.